I never imagined that my morning walk would change the course of my life. That crisp October morning in Central Park was supposed to be like any other, a brief respite from the relentless pace of Wall Street before diving back into quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. The fall air carried the scent of damp leaves and coffee from nearby vendors as I walked along the familiar path, my mind already racing with the day's agenda. Richardson and Blake needed my decision on the merger by noon, and the board was expecting a full briefing on our expansion into Asian markets. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, probably Jennifer, my executive assistant, with updates on the morning's crisis du jour. I ignored it. These 30 minutes were sacred, the only time I allowed myself to breathe before the day swallowed me whole. 20 years of climbing the corporate ladder had taught me that much: protect your sanity or lose it to the machine. I was mentally rehearsing my opening remarks for the board meeting when I noticed her. Sitting alone on a bench near Bethesda Fountain was a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, with a curious collection of trophies spread out before her. Not the glossy, manufactured kind you'd find in a store, but an eclectic assortment that spoke of stories and memories. Some were clearly handmade, crafted from whatever materials could be found: painted wood, repurposed metal, even one that appeared to be fashioned from colorful bottle caps. Something about her stopped me in my tracks. Maybe it was the incongruity of her presence among the joggers and business people hurrying through their morning routines. Or perhaps it was the quiet dignity with which she arranged her treasures, carefully wiping each one with a soft cloth despite their humble appearance. "Are you selling these?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. I rarely initiated conversations with strangers, especially during my precious morning walks. She looked up, her dark eyes meeting mine without a trace of intimidation. Most people in New York recognized me from the financial news or Forbes covers. If she did, she gave no indication. "Yes, sir. $5 each," she replied with a confidence that seemed beyond her years. "They're all championship trophies." I glanced at the motley collection and raised an eyebrow. Championships in what, exactly? A smile broke across her face, transforming her serious expression. "Whatever you want them to be. This one," she picked up a construction of tin cans and wire, "could be for winning at life. Or this one," she selected a wooden piece painted gold, "might be for being the kindest person in the world." I found myself smiling back, caught off guard by her imagination. "And who decides who wins these championships?" "You do. My mother says that true conquests come from the heart, not from what other people think you should win at." Her words hit me with unexpected force. When was the last time I'd pursued something simply because my heart called me to it? I couldn't remember. Every move in my life had been calculated, strategic, aimed at the next rung on the ladder of success as defined by others. The corner office, the summer house in the Hamptons, the private jet, all checkboxes ticked in my pursuit of what I'd been told constituted success. "What's your name?" I asked, suddenly wanting to know more about this young philosopher with her homemade trophies. "Olivia," she replied. "Olivia Carter. What's yours?" "Michael. Michael Donovan," I said, using just my name rather than my usual introduction as CEO of Donovan International. "Do you come here often, Olivia?" She nodded. "Every Tuesday and Thursday before school. My mom works early shifts at the hospital, so I have some time." I glanced at my watch, a $30,000 Patek Philippe that suddenly seemed ostentatious. I still had 15 minutes before I needed to head back to the office. "Tell me about your trophies. Which is your favorite?" For the next 10 minutes, I stood there as Olivia told me stories about each trophy, where she found the materials, how she put them together, what championships they represented in her imagination. Her voice was animated, her hands gesturing expressively as she shared her creative process. "This one's for my mom," she said, holding up a particularly intricate creation made from what looked like hospital ID clips and colorful paper clips. "She works harder than anyone I know. She's a nurse at Beth Israel, and sometimes she works double shifts so we can save up for my college fund." The mention of her mother's sacrifice struck another chord. When was the last time I'd recognized the people who made sacrifices in my orbit? My assistant Jennifer regularly canceled personal plans to accommodate my schedule. My driver, George, missed his son's baseball games to be available whenever I needed to be shuttled across town. "Your mother sounds like an amazing woman," I said sincerely. Olivia nodded. "She is. She always says we might not have everything, but we have enough. And having enough with love is better than having everything without it." My phone buzzed again, more urgently this time. The real world was calling me back. "I have to go, Olivia," I said, reaching for my wallet. "But I'd like to buy a trophy." Her eyes lit up. "Which one speaks to you?" I surveyed the collection and pointed to a simple one made of painted wood with a small mirror embedded in the center. "That one. What championship is it for?" "That's for the person who's brave enough to really see themselves," she said with unexpected solemnity. "The mirror shows who you really are, not who everyone thinks you are." I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. As I handed her a $20 bill, telling her to keep the change, I caught a glimpse of myself in the tiny mirror. For a split second, I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. "Thank you, Olivia," I said, carefully taking the trophy. "This might be the most important award I've ever received." As I walked away, her voice called after me. "Remember, Mr. Donovan, it's not just about having it. You have to earn it every day." I clutched the trophy in my hand, feeling its rough edges against my palm. Something had shifted inside me during that brief encounter, a collision of worlds that had left me questioning everything I thought I knew about success. Somehow, I knew that my life would never be quite the same. The next 3 days passed in a fog of meetings and conference calls, but my mind kept drifting back to the girl in the park. Olivia's words echoed in my thoughts, disrupting my carefully constructed routine. I found myself staring at the trophy during important discussions, my fingers tracing its uneven surface while executives droned on about market projections and quarterly earnings. "Michael, your thoughts on the proposal?" Thomas Whitfield, my CFO, was looking at me expectantly across the boardroom table, along with 12 other executives waiting for my response. For the first time in years, I realized I hadn't been listening. "Let's table this until tomorrow. I need to review the numbers more carefully." Surprise flickered across Thomas's face. I never postponed decisions. My reputation was built on swift, decisive action. But something about spending $4 million to outsource customer service jobs to reduce costs by 3.8% suddenly felt wrong. Back in my office, I placed Olivia's trophy on my desk beside the row of prestigious business awards I'd accumulated over the years. The contrast was stark, crystal and metal trophies engraved with my name alongside this humble creation with its tiny mirror. I peered into it again, trying to reconcile the reflection with the man I thought I was. "Jennifer, cancel my meetings for the afternoon," I said through the intercom. "Even the call with Tokyo?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "Yes, all of them. And clear my schedule tomorrow morning too." I left the office at 2 p.m., something I hadn't done in over a decade unless it was for another business engagement. My driver, George, nearly fell out of his chair in the waiting area when I appeared. "Everything all right, Mr. Donovan?" he asked as we pulled away from the towering glass building that bore my name. "I'm not sure, George," I answered honestly. "Take me to Central Park, please." "Any particular entrance, sir?" "The one near Bethesda Fountain." It wasn't Thursday, so I knew Olivia wouldn't be there, but I wanted to see the park again, really see it this time, not just pass through it with my mind elsewhere. I spent hours walking the paths, noticing details I'd overlooked for years, the intricate stonework of the Bethesda Terrace, the variety of expressions on people's faces as they enjoyed their afternoons, the way sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees. That night, I couldn't sleep. My penthouse on the Upper East Side felt cavernous and empty. The view of the Manhattan skyline that had once filled me with pride now seemed like a glittering distraction from what mattered. I pulled out my laptop and, on a whim, searched for Beth Israel Hospital's volunteer program. Thursday morning found me back at the park at 7:30 a.m., sitting on the bench where I'd met Olivia. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, not my assistant, not my executive team. For all they knew, I was taking a rare personal day. At 7:45, I spotted her approaching with her backpack slung over one shoulder and a box of trophies in her arms. She did a double take when she saw me. Mr. Donovan? You came back. I did, I smiled, helping her set up her display. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About the trophy, she asked, arranging her creations on the bench. About everything. Your mother's wisdom about true conquests coming from the heart. The idea of championships that matter beyond what others think. I paused, feeling strangely vulnerable. I realized I've been collecting the wrong kind of trophies. Olivia looked at me with those wise eyes that seemed to see right through the facade I'd built. It's never too late to start a new collection. We spent the next hour talking as joggers and early morning commuters streamed past us. Olivia told me about her life in a small apartment in Queens that she shared with her mother, Sarah, and younger brother, Ethan. Her father had left when Ethan was just a baby, and Sarah had worked double shifts ever since to keep them afloat. Despite their financial struggles, Olivia spoke about their home with genuine warmth, game nights around their small kitchen table, movie marathons on their second-hand couch, her mother's legendary pancakes on Sunday mornings. We don't have much, she shrugged, but we have everything that matters. I found myself sharing parts of my own journey that I rarely discussed. Growing up in a middle-class home in Boston, my father's hardware store that barely kept us afloat, the scholarship to Harvard that I'd seen as my ticket out. I told her about my early days on Wall Street, sleeping 4 hours a night and working weekends to climb the ladder. How I'd started my own firm at 32 and built it into a global empire by 40. And are you happy? She asked with the directness that only children and very wise adults can manage. The question stopped me cold. When was the last time anyone had asked me that? When was the last time I'd asked myself? I'm successful, I answered automatically. That's not what I asked. I looked out at the park, at the people rushing to jobs much like mine, and felt something crack open inside me. I don't know anymore. I thought I was. I have everything I ever wanted. But maybe not everything you need, she suggested gently. Before I could answer, her phone chimed with an alarm. I have to get to school, she said, gathering her unsold trophies. Let me give you a ride, I offered. My car's waiting at the entrance. She hesitated. My mom says not to accept rides from strangers. Your mom is absolutely right. I nodded approvingly. How about this? You can call her, tell her exactly who I am, and ask her permission. I can talk to her too if she'd like. 10 minutes later, after a brief but intense phone conversation with Sarah Carter, who, it turned out, did recognize my name and was appropriately cautious, Olivia and I were in my car heading toward her school in Queens. George raised an eyebrow in the rearview mirror, but said nothing as the young girl climbed into the back seat of the Bentley beside me. This is fancy, she said, running her hand over the leather seat. Too fancy, probably, I admitted, seeing the car through her eyes. As we approached her school, a modest public school with chain-link fences and colorful murals painted on the exterior walls, I felt a strange reluctance to end our conversation. Olivia, would it be all right if I came back to the park next Thursday? I'd like to hear more about your trophy championships. Her face lit up. Really? You want to hear more? I do. I think I have a lot to learn from you. Then I'll bring my best ones, she promised, hopping out as George held the door. I watched her run up the steps to the school entrance, her box of trophies clutched to her chest, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of anticipation, of looking forward to something that had nothing to do with business or status. That evening, I sat in my expansive home office surrounded by accolades and achievements, the Wall Street Journal's Executive of the Year award gleaming under custom lighting, and realized none of them had ever made me feel the way I did after talking with Olivia. These trophies celebrated what I'd built, but not who I was. They recognized my ability to generate wealth, but said nothing about my capacity for genuine human connection. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I rarely used personally. Donovan International Foundation, how may I direct your call? This is Michael Donovan. I'd like to speak with the director about establishing a new program. Of course, Mr. Donovan. One moment, please. As I waited on hold, I looked at Olivia's trophy sitting on my desk, the tiny mirror reflecting the office lights. For the first time in decades, I felt the stirrings of something authentic awakening inside me, a desire to earn a different kind of championship, one that came from the heart. The view from my office on the 52nd floor had always given me a sense of power. The entire city laid out before me like a chessboard, buildings rising and falling at the whims of people like me who moved money and resources around with keystrokes and signatures. That Friday evening, as Manhattan's lights began to twinkle against the darkening sky, I felt that power shift into something heavier, responsibility. I'd spent the past week in a state of uncharacteristic reflection, my conversations with Olivia replaying in my mind during board meetings and client calls. This morning, I'd even caught myself staring at a family portrait on a colleague's desk, wondering about the life he went home to each night while I returned to my empty penthouse. "Sir, the Tokyo markets open in 20 minutes. Will you be taking the call?" Jennifer stood in my doorway, her expression carefully neutral despite the unorthodox request I'd made earlier. "No, have Davis handle it. He knows the situation better than I do anyway." Jennifer's professional mask slipped slightly. "Davis? But you always take the Asia calls personally." "Things change, Jennifer." I swiveled in my chair to face the city again. "Have you worked here long enough to have accumulated vacation days?" Yes, of course. I've been your executive assistant for 6 years. And when was the last time you took more than a 3-day weekend? She hesitated, mental calculations visible on her face. "I believe it was 3 years ago, when my sister got married in California." I nodded, unsurprised but disturbed by her answer. "Take next week off." "All of it. Paid, of course." "Mr. Donovan, the quarterly reports are due and they'll still be there when you get back." I turned to face her fully. "When did we stop being humans first and employees second, Jennifer? When did we decide that spreadsheets deserved more attention than sunsets?" She blinked at me, clearly trying to determine if this was some kind of test. "I'm not sure how to answer that, sir." "Neither am I. That's the problem." I stood up abruptly. "Have my car brought around. And Jennifer? I mean it about next week. Go somewhere nice. The company will cover it." 30 minutes later, I was sitting in a quiet corner of the Oak Room at the Plaza Hotel, nursing a scotch that cost more than what most people earned in a day. I'd been coming here for years, closing deals over expensive drinks and feeling like I belonged among the elite. Tonight, the opulence felt hollow. "Mind if I join you?" The voice belonged to Richard Montgomery, my oldest friend and the only person from Harvard who still spoke to me regularly. He was one of New York's top cardiac surgeons, equally successful, but in a field that actually saved lives rather than just bank accounts. "Please," I gestured to the chair across from me. "How did you know I was here?" Jennifer called. "She's worried about you." Richard settled into the leather chair and signaled the waiter. "Apparently you've been acting strange. Canceling meetings, offering spontaneous vacations, talking about sunsets." His tone was light, but his eyes were evaluating me with the same intensity he probably used with patience. "I'm fine." I took another sip of my drink. "Just reassessing some priorities." "Midlife crisis? Should I be on the lookout for a 25-year-old girlfriend and a ridiculous sports car?" "I already have the ridiculous sports car," I reminded him. "And no, it's not that kind of crisis, if it's a crisis at all. Maybe it's clarity." Richard leaned forward, his joking manner fading. "What's going on, Mike?" "Really?" I hadn't planned to tell anyone about Olivia or my sudden philosophical awakening, but Richard had known me since we were 18, before money and status had reshaped my identity. If anyone might understand, it would be him. So I told him everything, the chance encounter in the park, the homemade trophies, the conversations that had somehow pierced through layers of corporate armor I hadn't even realized I was wearing. As I spoke, the story sounded bizarre even to my own ears, a billionaire CEO having an existential awakening because of a 12-year-old girl selling trinkets. When I finished, Richard was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he finally said, "I've been waiting 20 years for something like this to happen." "What do you mean?" "The Mike Donovan I knew at Harvard wanted to change the world, not just own pieces of it. You talked about ethical business practices and corporate responsibility before those terms were fashionable. Then somewhere along the way you became a ruthless bastard focused only on the bottom line." I supplied. He shrugged. Your words, not mine. But yes, essentially. The Mike I knew disappeared into Donovan International. I've just been waiting for him to find his way back. His words stung with their accuracy. I had changed, gradually but completely, until the idealistic young man with principles had been replaced by a titan of industry who measured everything, including relationships, in terms of profit and loss. So what now? Richard asked. You've had this revelation. What are you going to do about it? That was the question that had been haunting me all week. Awareness without action was just another form of indulgence. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know I can't keep going as I have been. Something has to change. The bigger the ship, the harder it is to turn, Richard mused. Donovan International employs, 15,000 people worldwide? You can't just walk away. I wouldn't want to, I said firmly. The company isn't the problem. It's how I've been running it. The values, or lack of them, that have been driving our decisions. We talked for hours, the way we used to in college before careers and responsibilities had compartmentalized our lives. Richard told me about his own struggles balancing his medical practice with family life, about the rewards of his work that went beyond his considerable salary. For the first time in years, I listened, really listened, to someone else's perspective without calculating how it might benefit me. By midnight, the decision had crystallized in my mind with the same clarity that had once guided my business instincts. It wouldn't be easy, and many people wouldn't understand, but I knew what I needed to do. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting for Monday. Then I did something unprecedented in my adult life. I disconnected completely for the weekend. No emails, no calls, not even news updates. I needed space to think, to remember who I had been before success redefined me. I spent Saturday walking through neighborhoods I hadn't visited in years: Washington Heights, Inwood, parts of Brooklyn far from the gentrified enclaves favored by my peer group. I ate at local diners instead of Michelin-starred restaurants, sat in community parks watching families interact, and for the first time in decades, I observed ordinary lives unfolding around me. Sunday found me in Queens, driving myself in an inconspicuous rental car rather than my usual chauffeured Bentley. I had an address from the school directory, not exactly ethical, but my connections had made it easy to obtain. I parked across the street from a modest apartment building where, according to my information, Sarah and Olivia Carter lived with young Ethan. I didn't approach them or make my presence known. That would have been inappropriate and probably alarming. I simply wanted to see their world, to understand the context that had produced someone as remarkable as Olivia. The neighborhood was working class, but vibrant. Small businesses with hand-painted signs, children playing on stoops, community gardens tucked between buildings. There was life here, authentic and immediate, despite the obvious economic challenges. As I watched a group of kids riding bikes along the sidewalk, laughing and calling to each other, I thought about my own childhood in Boston. We hadn't been poor, but we'd been far from wealthy. My father's hardware store had provided a decent living, and our home had been filled with love and laughter before my mother's illness changed everything. Somewhere in the relentless climb that followed, the scholarships, the all-nighters, the strategic relationships forged and discarded, I'd lost touch with that foundation. Monday morning, I arrived at the office before anyone else, sitting alone in the boardroom as dawn broke over the city. One by one, board members and executive officers filed in, their faces showing various degrees of concern and curiosity about this unprecedented emergency meeting. When everyone had assembled, I stood at the head of the table, aware that what I was about to say would send shockwaves through the financial world by afternoon. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. For 20 years, I've led this company with a singular focus on growth and profit. By any conventional metric, we've been extraordinarily successful. Nods and murmurs of agreement around the table. But I've come to believe that these metrics are insufficient. They tell us what our company is worth, but not whether it's worthy. They measure what we've accumulated, but not what we've contributed. Confusion replaced the agreement, board members exchanging glances as they tried to determine where this was heading. Effective immediately, I'm announcing a comprehensive reassessment of Donovan International's mission, practices, and impact. We will conduct a top-to-bottom review of every division, every policy, every product. Where we find that we've prioritized profit over people, both our employees and the communities we serve, we will make changes, even if those changes temporarily affect our bottom line. The room erupted in protests and questions. Thomas Whitfield, my CFO, looked as though he might have a stroke on the spot. Michael, the shareholders, he began. Will be fully informed, I cut him off. And yes, some may choose to take their investments elsewhere. That's their right. But those who stay will be part of building something that succeeds not just financially, but ethically and socially as well. You're talking about corporate suicide, Patricia Reynolds, one of our longest-serving board members, said bluntly. The market will punish any perceived weakness mercilessly. I met her gaze steadily. Perhaps in the short term. But I believe there's a hunger for companies that do more than extract value, ones that create it in multiple dimensions. And I'm willing to bet Donovan International's future on that belief. The debate raged for hours. Some board members threatened to resign on the spot. Others cautiously supported the vision while expressing concerns about implementation. Through it all, I remained firm, drawing on reserves of conviction I hadn't accessed in years. By day's end, the news had leaked as I knew it would. Donovan International's stock dropped 12 points in late trading. Financial commentators were already speculating about my mental health or secret legal troubles that might be driving this sudden change of direction. But as I stood at my office window watching darkness settle over the city once again, I felt lighter than I had in decades. Tomorrow would bring challenges, explanations to major shareholders, detailed plans to draft, resistance to overcome. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, it would be mine, one chosen with both head and heart aligned, worthy of a trophy not made of crystal or gold, but of painted wood with a tiny mirror that reflected the person I truly wanted to be. The weeks following my announcement were chaotic. As expected, our stock took a significant hit. Several major shareholders demanded private meetings where they alternated between thinly veiled threats and concerned inquiries about my mental health. 2 board members resigned in protest. The financial press had a field day speculating about hidden motives behind what they called my ethical epiphany. Through it all, I remained steadfast. Each Thursday morning found me in Central Park, sitting with Olivia before school, listening to her stories and sharing my own. Our conversations became a touchstone, reminding me why I had embarked on this tumultuous path in the first place. You look tired, she observed one morning, studying my face with that direct gaze that missed nothing. It's been a challenging week, I admitted, watching as she arranged her latest creations on the bench between us. Not everyone understands what I'm trying to do, my mom says. That doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy, she replied, polishing a trophy made from bottle caps and a small ceramic figurine. That's how you know it matters. Her simple wisdom continued to center me, providing clarity when corporate politics threatened to pull me back into old patterns of thinking. After a month of these meetings, I made a decision that surprised even me. Olivia, I'd like to invite you and your mother to visit my office, I said one Thursday morning. If you're interested, of course. And if your mother approves. Her eyes widened. Your real office? The big building with your name on it. That's the one. I want to show you what I'm trying to change, and... I hesitated, then decided on honesty. And I think my colleagues could benefit from meeting the person who inspired it all. Arranging the visit took some diplomatic maneuvering. Sarah Carter was understandably cautious about her daughter becoming involved with a billionaire CEO she barely knew, regardless of how many Thursdays we'd spent talking in the park. It took several phone conversations and a preliminary meeting at a neutral location, a coffee shop near their apartment in Queens, before she felt comfortable enough to agree. I don't want her paraded around like some kind of mascot, Sarah said firmly during our coffee shop meeting. She was a striking woman with the same intense eyes as her daughter, her hospital scrubs partially hidden under a worn jacket. Despite working a night shift, she had insisted on meeting me personally before agreeing to the visit. That's not my intention at all, I assured her. Olivia has helped me see my company and myself differently. I want to give her a glimpse of this world, but also introduce some of my colleagues to her perspective. No publicity, no photos, nothing that would identify her publicly. Sarah studied me for a long moment. You really have changed, haven't you? I remember reading about you a few years ago, the shark of Wall Street, who gutted companies without blinking. I winced at the reminder. I was that person. I'm trying not to be anymore. Something in my expression must have convinced her. All right, one visit. And I'm coming too. The following Tuesday, Sarah and Olivia Carter arrived at Donovan Tower. I had arranged for them to bypass the usual security protocols, meeting them personally in the private lobby used for VIP visitors. Olivia was wearing what I assumed was her best outfit, a neat blue dress with a cardigan and carrying a small gift bag. Sarah looked elegant, but slightly uncomfortable in a simple pantsuit. "Welcome to Donovan International," I said, genuinely pleased to see them outside our usual park setting. "Olivia, you look very professional today." She grinned. "Mom said I should dress like I was going to a job interview. Do people really work all the way up there?" She pointed toward the ceiling, trying to conceptualize the height of the skyscraper. "They do, including me on the 52nd floor. That's where we're heading now." As we rode the executive elevator upward, I found myself seeing my company through their eyes, the opulent marble lobby, the hushed efficiency, the obvious displays of wealth and power. What had once filled me with pride now made me slightly self-conscious. "This is quite something," Sarah murmured as the elevator silently ascended. "It's excessive in many ways," I admitted. "Part of what I'm trying to reevaluate." The doors opened directly into the executive suite, where Jennifer waited to greet us. I had briefed her extensively about our visitors, emphasizing the importance of treating them not as charity cases or publicity opportunities, but as honored guests whose insights were genuinely valued. Miss Carter, welcome to Donovan International," Jennifer said warmly. "Can I offer you anything? Coffee, tea, water? Perhaps hot chocolate?" The last option was clearly aimed at Olivia, who nodded eagerly. "With marshmallows, please?" "I think we can manage that," Jennifer smiled, her usual professional reserve softening. I gave them a tour of the executive floor, explaining in simplified terms what different departments did and how the company operated. Olivia absorbed everything with wide-eyed curiosity, asking surprisingly insightful questions about how decisions were made and who they affected. "So if you decide to close one of your factories, what happens to all the people who work there?" she asked as we looked at a global map showing our manufacturing facilities. The executives in the room exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was exactly the kind of question that rarely got asked in boardrooms, not because the answer was unknown, but because it was inconvenient. "Traditionally, they lose their jobs," I answered honestly. "The company might offer some severance pay or help with finding new employment, but often not enough." "That seems wrong," she said simply. "If your company is like a big family, like you said, then you shouldn't just leave part of your family behind." From the mouth of a child, the moral calculus seemed so clear. I watched my executives' reactions, noting who nodded in agreement and who looked away. These were the moments that would help me identify allies in the transformation ahead. After the tour, we gathered in a small conference room where I had invited a select group of executives, those I believed might be receptive to our new direction. As we settled around the table, Olivia placed her gift bag in front of me. "I brought something for your office," she announced. Inside was a new trophy, more elaborate than her previous creations. Made from various recycled materials, bottle caps, a small picture frame, metallic paper, it featured a miniature city rising from a base painted with tiny handprints. "It's a championship trophy for building things that help people, not just make money," she explained seriously. "The hands show that lots of people are needed to build something good." The simplicity and wisdom of her gift left me momentarily speechless. Several of my executives shifted uncomfortably, while others leaned forward with genuine interest. "Thank you, Olivia, I finally managed. This will have a place of honor in my office. But first, would you mind telling everyone what you told me about True Conquests?" For the next hour, something remarkable happened in that conference room. A 12-year-old girl from Queens engaged a group of hardened executives in a conversation about values, purpose, and authentic success. She spoke about her mother's wisdom and their family's approach to life with its financial constraints but emotional abundance. She answered questions without pretense or agenda, offering perspectives untainted by corporate politics or financial pressures. Sarah occasionally added her own insights, speaking eloquently about balancing her career as a nurse with single parenthood, about finding meaning in work beyond a paycheck, about the healthcare system she navigated both professionally and as a patient advocate for her community. By the end of the session, something had shifted in the room. I could see it in the thoughtful expressions, the notes being taken, the nods of recognition. These were people who had spent careers climbing the same ladders I had, pursuing the same narrow definition of success. Now, like me, they were being invited to question whether those ladders had been leaning against the right walls all along. "Before you go, I have a proposal," I said as our meeting concluded. "Olivia, you mentioned that your school's art program had its funding cut last year." She nodded. "Yeah, we only have art class once a week now, and we have to share supplies. Ms. Rodriguez brings stuff from home sometimes. What if Donovan International established a fund to restore those programs, not just at your school, but across the district? And what if we asked you to be on a student advisory board that would help decide how that money is used?" Her eyes widened. "Me? On a rail board?" "A real advisory board," I clarified. "With other students and teachers. Your perspective would be invaluable in making sure we're actually helping in ways that matter." Sarah gave me a searching look. "Is this a publicity stunt?" "No cameras, no press releases, I promised. This isn't about making Donovan International look good. It's about doing good, which is a different thing entirely." As they left that afternoon, I walked them all the way to the lobby, breaking my usual protocol of delegating such tasks. In the massive marble entrance, Olivia looked suddenly small again, a child in a world built for power brokers. "Will I see you Thursday?" she asked. I wouldn't miss it, I assured her. Watching them walk out into the bustling Manhattan street, I felt the weight of worlds colliding, the corporate empire I had built and the authentic human connection I was rediscovering. Somehow, I needed to find a way to bridge these worlds rather than choosing between them. The true challenge wasn't abandoning my business acumen, but redirecting it toward purposes that honored both mind and heart. Back in my office, I placed Olivia's new trophy front and center on my desk, its handmade irregularities a stark contrast to the sleek corporate design surrounding it. It wasn't just a decoration or a reminder, it was a compass, pointing toward the person I wanted to become and the legacy I hoped to build. The news of Olivia's visit spread through the company like wildfire. Not through official channels, I had kept my promise about no publicity, but through the quiet network of conversations that pulse through any organization. People were curious about the young girl who had apparently inspired the CEO's dramatic change of direction. Some viewed it with cynicism, others with cautious hope. "The education initiative is generating a lot of interest," Jennifer reported during our morning briefing. "Several department heads have asked if they can be involved. People are volunteering their time, not just company resources." This was new. Donovan International had always made charitable donations, tax-deductible, of course, and carefully calculated for maximum PR benefit, but employee engagement had never been part of the equation. "That's encouraging," I said, reviewing the proposal that had evolved from my impromptu offer to Olivia. What had started as a simple fund for art supplies had expanded into a comprehensive support program for arts and STEM education across Queens, with an emphasis on schools in underserved communities. "Let's make sure everyone who wants to participate has an opportunity." Over the next month, I watched with amazement as the initiative took on a life of its own. Engineers from our R&D division volunteered to teach robotics classes. Marketing staff helped students create campaigns for school events. Even our normally reserved legal team offered workshops on intellectual property for young creators. I didn't expect this level of enthusiasm, I admitted to Richard during one of our increasingly frequent dinners. It's as if people were just waiting for permission to care about something beyond quarterly results. "People want meaning, Mike," he replied, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "They've always wanted it. You just created space for them to find it at work rather than having to look elsewhere. My weekly meetings with Olivia continued, though they had evolved beyond our original conversations in the park. She was now officially part of the Student Advisory Board for the Education Initiative, which meant our discussions often included other students, teachers, and Donovan employees. I made sure to maintain our Thursday morning ritual, however, a space where we could talk person to person rather than CEO to advisor. The company's transformation wasn't without its challenges. Our stock price remained volatile as the market tried to make sense of our new direction. Several major clients threatened to take their business elsewhere, uncomfortable with what one called our sudden attack of conscience. Cost-cutting measures had to be implemented in some areas to offset increased investments in employee benefits and community programs. Through it all, I held firm to the vision that had crystallized that night in the Oak Room, a company that measured success not just in profits, but in purpose and positive impact. To my surprise, for every client or investor who walked away, others stepped forward, attracted by our evolving values and commitment to ethical business practices. 6 months into our transformation, I received an unexpected call from my assistant. "Your mother is here to see you," Jennifer announced, unable to keep surprise from her voice. Eleanor Donovan rarely visited my office. At 78, she preferred to have me come to her, either at her Upper East Side apartment or her summer home in the Hamptons. Our relationship had become increasingly formal over the years, reduced to obligatory holiday gatherings and the occasional charity event where we performed the roles of successful son and proud mother for the society photographers. "Send her in," I said, quickly clearing my desk of the papers I'd been reviewing. She entered with the same commanding presence she'd always possessed, impeccably dressed in Chanel with not a silver hair out of place. Her gaze swept the office, taking in the changes I'd made, particularly the collection of Olivia's trophies now displayed prominently on a shelf behind my desk. "Michael," she greeted me with a brief kiss on the cheek. "You're looking well." "Mother, this is a surprise. Is everything all right?" "That's what I came to ask you." She settled into a chair, her posture perfect as always. "The rumors have become impossible to ignore. People in my circle are saying you've had some sort of spiritual awakening, that you're dismantling everything you've built. I should have anticipated this." Eleanor moved in New York's most elite social circles, where reputation and wealth were the primary currencies. Any deviation from the expected path would be noted and discussed extensively. "I'm not dismantling anything," I assured her. "I'm rebuilding on a stronger foundation." "Because of a child?" Her tone made it clear how absurd she found this notion. "Cynthia Vanderwall told me you've been seen with a young girl from Queens, of all places. That you've set up some sort of charity in her name." "Not in her name. With her input." I sat back, studying my mother's face, the familiar features that had become increasingly mask-like over the years as social expectations and cosmetic procedures had literally reshaped her. And yes, Olivia has been instrumental in helping me see things differently. Eleanor's perfectly manicured fingers tapped the arm of her chair. "You know how this looks, don't you? A middle-aged billionaire suddenly fixated on a child from the outer boroughs? People talk, Michael." The suggestion infuriated me. Those people need better things to occupy their minds. There's nothing inappropriate about my relationship with Olivia and her family. She's a remarkable young person who happened to say the right thing at exactly the right moment in my life. She made me remember who I was before all this. I gestured to the office, the building, the empire I'd constructed. My mother's expression softened slightly. "And who is that, exactly?" The question caught me off guard. When was the last time Eleanor had asked anything about my interior life? "Someone who believed business could be a force for good, not just profit," I answered after a moment. "Someone who wanted to build something meaningful, not just successful." "Your father's son," she said quietly. I stared at her, startled by the reference. My father had died when I was 19, his modest hardware store barely leaving enough to cover the medical bills from his brief, brutal battle with cancer. Eleanor had remarried within 2 years to a hedge fund manager whose connections had helped launch my career on Wall Street. We rarely spoke of my father or the middle-class life we'd left behind. He would have been horrified by what I became, I admitted. By what we both became, if I'm being honest. Perhaps. She looked down at her hands, rings glittering in the afternoon light. When did we decide that having more was more important than being more, Michael? The question, so similar to what I'd asked Jennifer months ago, stunned me coming from Eleanor. For as long as I could remember, she had been the one pushing me toward greater achievement, more prestigious connections, larger displays of wealth. I thought that's what you wanted, I said carefully. You've never seemed disappointed by my success. By your success? Never. By what it cost you, what it cost us. That's a different matter. She gazed out the window at the Manhattan skyline. When Stanley died, I was terrified. A widow at 42 with a son entering college and barely enough savings to keep our home. Marrying Edward seemed like the only way to secure our future. This was the most my mother had spoken about that period in decades. I remained silent, afraid any interruption might close this unexpected window into her thoughts. But somewhere along the way, security became luxury, and luxury became necessity. The world we entered demanded constant proof of worth through wealth. I pushed you toward it because I thought it was what you needed to be safe. She turned back to me, her eyes clearer and more present than I had seen them in years. But safe isn't the same as fulfilled, is it? No, I agreed softly. It isn't. Eleanor stood and walked to the shelf of trophies, examining them with genuine curiosity. Tell me about the girl who makes these. Tell me about Olivia. For the next hour, I did just that, describing our first meeting, our conversations, the wisdom beyond her years that had somehow penetrated the armor I'd built around myself. I told her about Sarah, raising 2 children on a nurse's salary while maintaining an unshakable set of values. About their modest apartment filled with more warmth and genuine connection than my penthouse had ever known. As I spoke, I watched something shift in my mother's expression, skepticism giving way to thoughtfulness, then to a wistful recognition. You should meet them, I said impulsively. Not here, not in this tower. Somewhere normal. I have dinner with them every other Friday at a little Italian place near their apartment. Nothing fancy, just good food and conversation. You could join us next week. Eleanor looked momentarily alarmed at the suggestion. A restaurant in Queens? Michael, I haven't been to Queens since we lived there when I was a child. I finished for her. Before Dad got the store in Boston and we moved, I remember, even if we don't talk about it. Color rose in her cheeks. That was a different life. Maybe it's time to reconnect with parts of that life, I suggested gently. The good parts. To my surprise, she didn't immediately refuse. I'll think about it, she said, gathering her purse. No promises. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Your father would be proud, you know. Not of the buildings or the money. Of this finding your way back to what matters. After she left, I sat motionless, absorbing the impact of her words and the unexpected glimpse of the woman behind the carefully maintained facade. All these years, I had assumed my drive for success was self-generated, or at worst, a response to our early financial insecurity. I had never considered that my mother's pushing came from a place of fear rather than ambition. That Friday evening, I arrived at Mangia Bene, the family-owned Italian restaurant that had become our regular dinner spot, to find not only Sarah, Olivia, and Ethan waiting, but Eleanor as well. She looked simultaneously out of place and determined in her designer outfit amid the checkered tablecloths and decades-old decor. You came, I said, unable to hide my surprise. I said I would think about it, she replied with dignity, though I could see nervousness in the way she clutched her purse. I thought about it. The evening that followed was initially awkward, Eleanor clearly unused to. Children's direct questions or the casual atmosphere of a neighborhood restaurant, but gradually warmed as barriers lowered. I watched in amazement as my mother, who could navigate a Met Gala with practiced ease, found her way into real conversation with a nurse from Queens and her 2 children. The transformation in Eleanor over the following weeks was subtle but profound. She began asking about the education initiative, offering suggestions based on her extensive network of connections. She invited Sarah for lunch, woman to woman, without telling me until afterward. Most surprisingly, she started mentioning my father in conversation, small anecdotes and memories that she had seemingly locked away for decades. "I never thought I'd see this," Richard commented after observing Eleanor with Olivia at a small gathering I hosted. "Your mother discussing public school funding issues with actual passion." "She's remembering who she was," I replied, watching as Eleanor listened intently to Olivia's description of a new art project. "Before wealth defined her. We both are." The ripples of change continued to spread, from me to my company, from my company to the communities we served, from my rediscovered values to my mother's reawakening humanity. None of it followed a strategic plan or a corporate timeline. It simply unfolded, one authentic connection leading to another, creating a web of transformation I could never have engineered deliberately. One evening, as we left Mangia Bene after another family dinner, Eleanor pulled me aside while Sarah helped the children into their coats. "I found something I want to give Olivia," she said quietly. "It's a necklace Stanley gave me when we were first married. Nothing valuable in monetary terms, just a simple silver heart. But it meant everything to me once. I think she should have it." I stared at my mother, this woman I was finally getting to know after a lifetime of formal distance. She'd cherish that. "The girl was right, Eleanor said, watching Olivia laugh with her brother. "The true conquests do come from the heart." I had forgotten that. Thank you for helping me remember. 5 years can change everything or reveal what was always there beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. On a bright September morning, I stood in the newly renovated community center in Olivia's neighborhood, surrounded by evidence of transformation both physical and philosophical. The building, once an abandoned warehouse slated for luxury condo conversion, now housed art studios, science labs, counseling offices, and a medical clinic staffed part-time by volunteer physicians from New York's top hospitals, including Richard, who had become as invested in this community as I was. The Donovan Foundation had provided the initial funding, but the center had quickly become a collaboration between corporate resources and community wisdom. Mr. D. Ethan, now 13 and shooting up like a weed, spotted me from across the room. "Did you see what we did with the robotics lab? The new programming is awesome." I smiled at his enthusiasm. "Show me after the ceremony. I want to see what you've been working on." The center was filling with people gathering for the official ribbon cutting, local families, Donovan employees, community leaders, and a small contingent of press I had reluctantly allowed after Sarah convinced me that sharing the model might inspire similar projects elsewhere. In a quiet corner, Olivia, taller now at 17, with the same determined eyes but a new confidence in her bearing, was arranging a display of trophies. Not her handmade ones, but real awards the center had won for its innovative programs over the past 3 years. Still, each was accompanied by one of her special creations, the symbolic championship alongside the official recognition. "Nervous about your speech?" I asked, joining her at the display. She shook her head. "Not really. I'm just making sure everything looks right." She adjusted a trophy slightly. 5 years ago, I never would have imagined any of this. "That makes 2 of us," I admitted. "Though I think you had more vision than you're giving yourself credit for." Her smile acknowledged the compliment. "Mom says you're the one with vision. I just reminded you to use it for something that matters." Sarah appeared beside us, elegant in a simple dress she would have been unable to afford in the days when we first met. Her promotion to nursing director at Beth Israel had been earned through years of dedication, though I liked to think the confidence she'd gained through her involvement with the foundation had helped her pursue opportunities she might once have considered beyond reach. "They're ready for us," she said. "Eleanor just arrived. She's saving seats in the front row." My mother had become a fixture at foundation events, her social connections proving surprisingly valuable in opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed to a nonprofit focused on underserved communities. At 83, she had more energy and purpose than I could remember seeing in decades. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, acknowledgments of the many people who had contributed to the center's creation, from corporate donors to community volunteers. I kept my remarks short, emphasizing that the building represented not charity but partnership, a recognition that wealth meant little if not used to create opportunity for all. When it was Olivia's turn to speak, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with my role in her development and everything to do with the remarkable person she had always been. 5 years ago, I sat in a park selling handmade trophies because I believed everyone deserves to be celebrated for the victories that matter, she began, her voice clear and confident. I didn't know then that one conversation could change not just my life, but an entire community. What we're celebrating today isn't just a building, it's the idea that when we recognize the championship qualities in each other, we all win. As applause filled the room, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The initial turmoil at Donovan International had eventually settled into a new equilibrium. Some executives and investors had departed, unable or unwilling to adapt to our evolving priorities. Others had embraced the changes with unexpected enthusiasm. Our stock had recovered, and then some, as a new generation of investors seeking ethical opportunities discovered our commitment to balanced prosperity. The company itself had transformed, still profitable, still competitive, but now measuring success through a broader lens that included employee well-being, environmental impact, and community benefit. The education initiative that had begun with Olivia's school had expanded across the city and then to every location where Donovan International operated worldwide. My personal life had undergone equally profound changes. While I still lived in Manhattan, I had downsized from my ostentatious penthouse to a comfortable but modest apartment within walking distance of Central Park, our park as I still thought of it. My schedule, once packed with back-to-back meetings and international flights, now included regular dinners with Sarah and the children, volunteers' shifts at the center, and actual vacations where I disconnected completely from work. Most significantly, I had developed relationships that went beyond strategic networking or superficial socializing. Real friendships, rooted in mutual respect and genuine caring. A surrogate family of sorts, with Olivia, Ethan, and Sarah at its center, expanded to include Richard, Eleanor, and an ever-growing circle of people who shared our commitment to meaningful connection. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and toured the facility, I found a quiet moment with Sarah on the center's rooftop garden, another community-driven project that had transformed barren space into a source of beauty and fresh produce. Did you ever imagine this would happen when you let your daughter talk to a stranger in the park? I asked, gazing out at the neighborhood spread below us. Sarah laughed softly. Never. I was terrified when she told me about you, you know. I Googled you immediately and found all those articles about the ruthless CEO who dismantled companies without blinking. She turned to face me. You were very scary on paper. I was pretty scary in person too, I acknowledged. At least until a 12-year-old girl saw through all that. It wasn't just Olivia, Sarah said thoughtfully. She may have been the catalyst, but this transformation, she gestured to encompass not just the center, but everything that had changed. This was already in you, waiting for permission to emerge. You just needed someone to remind you it was there. Her insight resonated with what I had come to believe myself. Olivia hadn't changed me. She had revealed me, the person I had been before ambition and fear narrowed my definition of success. Still, I'm grateful fate put her on that bench with her trophies that morning, I said. And that you trusted your daughter's judgment enough to let this unfold. Mothers know things, Sarah replied with a smile. I saw how she lit up talking about your conversations. How seriously you took her ideas. That told me more about who you really were than any Google search. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the garden, we were joined by Olivia, Ethan, and Eleanor, fresh from their tour of the building. What do you think? I asked my mother, who was examining the raised vegetable beds with obvious approval. I think Stanley would have loved this place, she said, mentioning my father with the ease that had gradually returned to her voice over the years. It reminds me of that community garden we helped start when Michael was small, before we moved to Boston. Do you remember that, Michael? The memory surfaced slowly, weekend mornings spent digging in the soil, my father teaching me to plant tomato seedlings, the pride of harvesting vegetables we had grown ourselves. I hadn't thought about that in years, I admitted. But yes, I remember. We're going to add fruit trees next spring, Ethan announced enthusiastically. Mr. Wilson from the botanical garden is helping us choose varieties that will grow well here." As he launched into a detailed explanation of urban orchards, I caught Olivia watching me with a knowing smile. "What?" I asked when Ethan paused for breath. "Just thinking about championships," she replied. "Real ones." I understood immediately. By conventional measures, wealth, power, market dominance, my life might appear less successful than it had been 5 years ago. I had deliberately stepped back from some opportunities, delegated authority I once would have jealously guarded, and prioritized impact over expansion in many company decisions. But by the measures that truly mattered, purpose, connection, contribution, I had never been more successful. The real championship wasn't found in crystal trophies or financial statements, but in moments like this, standing in a garden we had built together, surrounded by people who had become family, part of something genuine and lasting. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and most of the staff had gone home, I found myself alone in the center's main hall. The space was quiet now, but evidence of the day's celebration remained: program booklets, a few stray balloons, photographs of the center's evolution displayed on easels around the room. On impulse, I walked to Olivia's trophy display and picked up the one that had started it all, that simple wooden creation with its tiny mirror, the first one I had purchased from her in the park. 5 years of handling had worn its paint in places, but the mirror still reflected back whoever gazed into it. I studied my reflection, the face both familiar and transformed. There were more lines around my eyes, some additional gray in my hair. But the most significant change wasn't visible on the surface. It was in the eyes looking back at me, eyes that had regained their ability to see beyond balance sheets and strategic advantages to the human impact of every decision. "Still earning it?" Olivia's voice came from the doorway. I turned to find her watching me with that perceptive gaze that missed nothing. "Trying to," I answered honestly. "Every day." She joined me at the display, adjusting one of the trophies slightly. "You know, when I was making these, I never really thought about the long term. They were just a way to make a little extra money for my college fund. But now I'm thinking maybe they're what I want to do with my life. Not making trophies exactly, but helping people recognize what really matters. What they're really winning at, beyond what society tells them is important." "Sounds like a career in values-based organizational consulting," I suggested. "Or philosophy. Or maybe both." "Maybe," she agreed. "I've got time to figure it out. But I know I want it to be something that helps bridge worlds, the way you've been doing." As we walked through the quiet building toward the exit, I realized that was exactly what the past 5 years had been about, not abandoning the business world I knew, but connecting it to other values and perspectives that made it more humane and meaningful. Bridging the world of corporate power with the world of community wisdom. The world of wealth with the world of worth. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening routines, lights coming on in apartment windows, people returning from work, families gathering for dinner. An ordinary scene that I now saw with extraordinary clarity. These weren't just buildings or demographic data points. They were homes where people navigated the same fundamental human needs for purpose, connection, and dignity that I had rediscovered through Olivia's simple wisdom. "My mother was right, you know," I said as we waited for the others to join us. "True conquests do come from the heart. I just never understood what that meant until I met you." Olivia smiled, the same bright expression that had first caught my attention on that park bench 5 years ago. Maybe that's the real trophy worth winning, understanding what actually deserves to be celebrated. As Sarah, Ethan, and Eleanor emerged from the building to join us, I felt the profound rightness of where this unexpected journey had led. My legacy would never be defined simply by the buildings bearing my name or the wealth I had accumulated. It would live in the center and others like it, in the company's evolved mission, in the lives touched by our initiatives, and most importantly, in the authentic connections we had formed across boundaries of age, wealth, and circumstance. Together, we walked toward the neighborhood Italian restaurant that had become our tradition: a billionaire, a nurse, a wise teenager, an enthusiastic boy, and an elderly society woman who had rediscovered her humanity. An unlikely family bound not by blood, but by the recognition of what truly constituted winning at life. Behind us, the community center stood as a monument not to charity or corporate social responsibility, but to the power of seeing people for who they really are and building something meaningful together. The ultimate trophy earned one relationship, one decision, one act of authentic connection at a time.